Hi everybody, Zach here, and welcome to the 6th lesson in our RTS tutorial series. In this lesson, we'll be covering edge scrolling. So let's get to it. Load up your project, and we'll get started. Hi guys, and here we are back in our Unreal Editor. So let's go look at what we've done so far in terms of what we have set up. So we hit play, click on the screen, we can add movement in. We have our character moving around. We can pan. We can zoom in. We don't have that set up. So we have just two last little bits to do for our camera, and our camera in this section will be done. So those little bits include setting up our edge scroll and our boundaries. Let's do our edge scroll today, and we'll do our boundaries next time. So open up your player controller. And while we're here, actually, let's do some housekeeping stuff. Let's find the sequence. We're actually going to delete show mouse cursor. What we're going to do is you click on RTS player, and we're going to go in here, and we're going to look for our show cursor. So we want to show mouse cursor. We want to enable click events. We want our mouse to show on events. Touch is more for the screen or VR. I'm not entirely sure actually. And we want to set our mouse to whatever you want to set it to. I'm going to set mine to hand. I'm not sure if it actually works. Every time I do hand, I get crosshairs instead. But hey, we'll try. So now we should have a mouse show up. Yep, we do. And the mouse is showing up as a hand. Awesome. On the test file I used for demoing everything, it's a crosshair despite being hand there. Alright, so we got rid of that and we cleaned up some code. But now we need to add in our edge scroll. And the way we're going to do that is we need to consider when we edge scroll, what do we need to know? We need to know where the mouse is in relation to the screen. That means we have to know something before we can know where the mouse is. We need to know how big the screen is to know how big where the mouse is in relation to it. If we put it by pixels, like you can with HTML,
hey guys,
for example,
how's it going?
You're going to end up with a number that works for some screens but not others. So we need to get the size of the screen. And fortunately for us, built into Unreal are a few nodes that will take care of that for us. But before we do that, let's actually set up the starting part of this. And for that, we're going to need 2 bits of input. We don't need to add anything in our world settings or our project settings. We just need to put the inputs into here, which is mouse X. So right click and type a mouse X, and right click, type mouse Y, and there are 2 bits of input. We're going to drag off of here with a branch. So we don't want edge scroll to happen when someone's panning and moving the mouse around on their own to get a better angle on something. And we're going to take our bool of disable cam movement and plug it into there. I'm going to highlight both and Control W for duplication. Plug those in. And we're going to stop here for a moment, and we're going to add in a macro. Now, due to the complexity of this macro and due to the complexity of the logic we have to go through in understanding it, I like making it separate. And even when I'm doing this on my own, even when I know what I plan to do, I always make this macro in the macro window. I don't build it in here like we did with the movement and then collapse it. I do similar to how we did the on-play reference cast there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a macro called edge scrolling, or edge scroll actually. Let's just call it edge scroll. Gonna make it a movement category there. Sorry, try not to cough in your ear. I'm gonna add in 2 parameters, both which will be floats. I should have only added one, changed it to float, and added the other. And this will be mouse X and mouse Y. Now, I'm going to need a couple of outputs, but I'm not going to add those in yet. And we'll discuss why we aren't adding those in quite yet. And when I say discuss, we'll discuss as we go on. I want you to notice something first before we try to unpack that aspect of what's going on. And so, as I said earlier, the first thing we really need to do then is to get our viewport size or our screen size. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to right click under here and type in get viewport size. is we have a couple of options. We have HUD and viewport. The one we want is viewport. And if we just click it, we'll get it up there. And we're going to drag off of this. Actually, no, we're not. What we're going to do is we're actually going to split this pin into two parts. So we're going to release this, highlight over return value, right click, and split pin, which will give us two new pins, as you can see here. And that will give us our return of X value and our Y value. And this is where things will get very confusing. There are two layers of confusion, or two aspects that can confuse people here. And as we get to both of them, I will explain it. But I'm going to explain them together, hopefully. So before we get to that stage, let's get to the part where we can see where the confusion can come from. So we have our viewport size. We need our mouse size, or our mouse location, not our mouse size. So we don't want to set it, we want to get it. So get mouse position. So we have get mouse position for player, on platform, on viewport, and scaled by DPI. By the way, if you're doing the pan controls using mouse position, scaled by DPI is honestly one of the easiest ways to use it. If you are using an approach that requires executables for this function, or sorry, for this instead of the macro like I have set up, then again use scaled by DPI. It will work much better. But for this, mouse position is fine. So we'll get mouse position. Now we have, two sets of two values. We have a set of X values from our viewport and our mouse location. We have a set of values from our Y locations from our viewport and our mouse location. And in fact, while I don't typically do this, I am going to reverse the two of these locations because visually, I think in terms of teaching this material, it makes it easier to understand. Even all my code, I have this the other way around. This is the first time I've done it this way. So, what we need to do is we need to, and the reason why I switched this actually, will relate to this, what we need to do is we need to get the proportion of the screen the mouse has covered. So to do that, we have to divide the mouse location by the screen size. Now, you're probably thinking, well, the mouse is only covering the same portion of the screen. It's the same size. The mouse doesn't change sizes. The way to think about that is, if you take in statistics, think about it like a distribution. As you move from the left-hand side to the right, and you're at that last sort of 0.05, you've covered 90% of that 95% of that distribution. If you've taken stats without any maths, come talk to me after. I have some complaints for you. Now, if you haven't taken stats and you have no idea what I'm talking about, this is where the first sort of major layer of confusion can come in. First, you need to understand that the X and Y here do not correspond to our mouse X and Y in the same sense. So let's think about this part for a moment. I'm looking at the mouse. The viewport X and Y don't correspond to our mouse X and Y. These two perfectly correspond. These two sets don't. Which is fine. It just means that there's a little bit of confusion we have to deal with. And the way to think about that is, the mouse position is dealing with a 3D location, X, Y, Z typically, on a 2D plane. Sorry, not a 3D for the mouse. We're looking at the game world. Let me just get that open. It's a 3D world. There's depth to it. There's a height to it. There's width to it. We have the X, Y, Z there. But when we look at our screens, we are looking at a flat object. Now, if you ever played Elite Dangerous, in VR versus out of VR, that's why in 1 the
hey guys,
radar is much easier to read, or the little whatever that graph is I have. So our Y is our up and down, our X is our left and right. For those of you who are paying attention in terms of things, you'll understand why I haven't put these in yet and the potential confusion that can arise later on. So the way to think about this is, as we move down the screen, we are filling the screen. It's like pulling down a curtain. So up here, the curtain is 0%. As we come to the very bottom, it curtains at 1 or 100%. Remember, these are floats. And they will range in a value of 0 to 1, where 1 is 100%. These are ratios. And likewise, same for the left and right. From the right, we are dragging the curtain to the left. Sorry, from the left, we are dragging the curtain to the right. So on the left, we're at 0%. As we move to the right, it gets to 100%. So hopefully that made sense. Now the way we get these proportions is we divide the numbers by each other. So our mouse position is going to be the smaller value, hopefully. Technically, if you have two monitors, yes, the mouse position can be the larger value. It's part of the issue I have trying to show you that setup. So we get our x-axis, and we're going to drag off of this, and we'll divide again, float by float, and we'll divide by the screen's y-axis, and we have a proportion of our mouse and y. So now we have our proportion of mouse coverage in the y and x. Now we need to make a decision on how much we want to cover. I've seen tutorials and books and games and videos and things like that where this number will vary ever so slightly. So it's really up to you. Now, because I work in psychology, I kind of enjoy the statistics distribution idea of it. So in stats, when you have a test where you think there's no difference, where you think one group will score better on something, it's known as a one-tailed test, and you have a probability value of 5 or 0.055%. Now, if you think the groups will score differently, but you don't think you don't know which group will score better or worse, but you just think they'll have different scores, it's known as a two-tailed test. And you have the same probability, but you have to split it across both sides. Just like here, we have to split our probabilities across both sides of the screen. And to do that, we use 0.25%. If you add the two tails up, you get 5%. So I'm going to use that number. If you didn't follow anything I just said about stats, don't worry about it. You can use the numbers I'm using. It represents 2.5% of the screen on every axis. So 2.5 at the top there, 2.5 at the bottom, 2.5 over here, and 2.5 over here. A lot of tutorials, a lot of books, a lot of games use 1%. 1%. I've seen a couple books recommending in game design recommending using 5%. I think that's just way too ridiculous, especially if you have a windowed game, or a window game with a border or without a border. So I'm just going to use the 2.5%. I think it's a little bit more reasonable. So I'm going to drag off of here, and I'm going to do greater than or equal to. And I'm just going to double check my cheat sheet before I say anything. Yep, greater than or equal to. So this one, if it's greater than or equal to, will be the right-hand side of the screen coming off the x-axis. If you, again, aren't yet realizing why that's going to make things even more confusing as we go look at our basic movement controls and consider what our forward movement typically is. So to get 2.5% in here, I'm not going to type in any of those numbers, well, except for the 5. I'm going to type in 0. Remember, 0 to 1, 0.975. This is because at this point, when I hit 2.5% left on the right-hand side of the screen, or remaining on the right-hand side of the screen, I have covered 97.5% of the screen to the left-hand side. I'm going to add a reroute node into there. And I'm going to drag off of it. And I'm going to do greater than or equal to. Sorry, less than or equal to, not greater than. And I'm going to do this one as 0.0 or 0.025. So that would be the 2.5% on the left-hand side of the screen. I'm going to just copy. Actually, I'm going to copy the reroute node as well. These down here, because it doesn't change when we get down here. And yes, I am being a bit pedantic about my laying that out in a way that I enjoy. Okay, and however I want to highlight all of that. Thank you. So that gets us our proportions. And I am just going to, calculate proportion of screen covered. I feel like that node needs to be further in here somehow. There we go. Calculate proportion of screen covered. Determine decide if edge scroll needed. You can put whatever comment you want in there, whatever works for you. So now I'm going to add my outputs. And when I started recording this, I've done this one a couple of times now. I was going to show you a different method of how to do this, and as I got halfway into it, I realized that a lot of the functions I was using to do it don't exist in 4.21. So I'm not going to even attempt that method. So I'm going to name the first output delta speed x. Going to name the other one delta speed y. Except for I spelled delta wrong, so let me go fix that real quick. There you go. So all delta means in this case is change in the speed in the x-axis and change the speed in the y-axis. And again, this can be a little bit confusing. And I'm just going to flat out say it if you haven't worked it out or haven't caught when I have flat out said it without putting all the links together. This x, in terms of mouse up here kind of x, is actually mouse over here x. When we think about x and y when we're in our game, if I just open this up, now if we hit play, x is this way towards the top of the screen because that's the way when we hit W it goes. Because the WASD keys are thinking about this in the 3D plane. That's how we've set it up. But we are thinking about a mouse on a 2D surface. So our X and Y's for how we move our pawn with our controller versus how we can move it with our mouse are reversed from each other. So we can either reverse our naming in the macro or outside the macro. There are countless ways to reverse it. Yeah, there's different ways to do it. You just need to find the method that works for you. If you remember, sorry, let me go back here for a minute. If you remember when we did zoom, in our original version of this, before we added our clamps in, we had our less than or greater than branches in there. I did one recording before the one I even put up where I had used a different way of doing that. I had used less than instead of greater than or something like that. I can't remember what's actually in it. And when I went to explain it on the video, I was stammering, I was confused, I was explaining it backwards, and I realized what I had done was I had coded it, or scripted it, because this is a script, while I had scripted it correctly, I had done the conceptual opposite of how I had done the opposite of how I conceptually think about it. So, it doesn't matter where you reverse the your x and y for this. You just need to reverse your x and y at some point, and it will work correctly. I will not reverse it so you see what the issue is, and then I will reverse it so you can actually see what I mean by reverse it if you haven't worked that out yet. Oh, sorry, these actually aren't supposed to be floats. I am not being smart about this. So they're going to be executables. The mouse will come in and all that fun stuff. Because we aren't getting any input value from these. We aren't getting any of the float values. So from here, from mouse X, we're going to grab a branch. And we're going to drag off the false before we do anything else. And we're going to grab another branch. There we go. We have 2 branches. Isn't that lovely? So our first branch will, of course, get plugged into this guy here. We've ordered them in the way which we're going to plug in branches. Yep, we're going to have 4. We'll plug that in. And before we go any further, before we do the other 2 branches, let's do part of the code that's going to be on this side. So I drag off the true. I'm going to want to actually add some variables in first. You need another movement variable. So let's just open this up, get rid of the bool one for a second. We're going to drag off of here. Oh, we can't set variable there. I forgot with branches you can't do that. So we'll set it here, and we'll call this edge scroll speed x. And this will be a float. This will be under movement variable. And we are going to do edge scroll speed y. And again, this will be a movement. Sorry, not movement, movement variable. So one thing I don't like about Unreal is that it makes all the categories. I mean, it is nice. Categories should be the same, but I'm going to have multiple types of time in our next section. So we'll have a category for the game time, the game calendar, and the time settings. So I do sometimes like having different names than what appears elsewhere, like in the macro section. So we only need to worry about the x for a minute. We need 3 copies of this. So we're gonna set it, and I'm just gonna highlight it, Control W, Control W. Now, if you haven't worked out why we need 3 based on the fact there's just 3 pins here, remember there's only really 3 options we have for our x-axis. We either are moving this way, we're on the left-hand side, we're either moving that way on the right-hand side, or we're not moving. So let's just do the not moving one first. That's the easiest. Hey, no movement. Set the speed to 0. So remember that this x is our left and our right instead of our up and down like it is for movement. So if you remember, right is our +1 on our scale and left is our -1. So if we think about it that way, probably the larger number, this 97.5%, is going to mean we're on that side, which means we're probably going to want a positive number instead of a negative number. So let's drag off this first one and set this to a positive value of, let's try 15. And if that's our right, then this must be our left. And let's make that a -15. Okay, so that actually sets up our edge scroll on one side. Let's grab all of this. Oops, sorry. I forgot to plug in the true. Don't grab it yet. Plug the true in from the second branch into that middle value. Next, we're going to just copy all of this. We are going to paste it down here. What we're going to do is we're going to right-click on this top one, replace variable with edge scroll y. Repeat that for the other 2. Hey, there we go. And just going to actually drag these 2 down so I have a bit more room. And of course, again, dragging off this top one, we're going to go straight into here. And off the bottom one, we'll go into our last one. And then off our mouse Y, we'll come here. And I'm just going to drag these back slightly. Drag those forward slightly. Okay, so let's look at this for a minute. So, as we know, again, this is also reverse. So this is another layer of potential confusion where things are different than how we're used to. When we tell our pawn to move forward, it's moving up the screen, but in its 3D realm, it is moving forward. It is moving on the x-axis, because that's just how it works. But because we don't have 3 axes, we don't have x, y, z, we only have x and y on the screen, it works a little bit differently. So y is pulling down, remember. So if we are down here, then we have that larger value. But remember, when we're down here, we want the screen to go down. So we actually want this one to be our negative value. And when we have the smaller value really up here, so we want that to be our positive value. Like I said, there is some reversals from what we're used to. This is the reversing of a scale that we're used to thinking about. Alrighty, that actually pretty much finishes up the edge scroll. All we have left to do now, and I forgot to actually include we actually need a third one for this one. Sorry. I'm going to move this to the top. And we're just going to name it then. So, what we need now is to hook these all into there. It isn't just that simple, though. But let's hook up the execute parts first, at least. So let's plug that in. I'm going to add a reroute in. And I'm just going to plug everything into that reroute just to make my life easier. Makes it look neater. Alrighty, let's just line that up so it's a little bit neater. I'm actually going to drag this so it's a little bit more centered. And we're going to come out here a tiny, tiny bit. Sorry, I don't want to drag both of those out. Just want to drag you out so I have a little bit of room here. Alright. Now, this is, as I said, where things can get confusing. You have to reverse things. You can either reverse what comes out of here. So, to explain what I mean, let's go to our event graph. Let's find where this is at. So, we have our edge scroll. Let's just drag that in there. We have our false and our false. Okay. So, our first area of reversal actually is right there. We could take these out, and we could reverse them here. That is not the smart way to do it. It will actually lead to more issues. Don't do it that way. Now, when we come out here, we need to also, tell it what to do with the new data it has. So, we're going to have something similar to what we had here. We're going to have something that gets this information. We can reverse our X pin and our Y pin for that. Let's actually set that up so you can see what it is. So I'm going to just open my references up. I'm going to grab my camera pawn. I'm going to get it. I'm going to drag off of it, and I'm going to add actor local offset. Now, I'm going to give you a big hint again for next week in a second. At least for the bug I'm intentionally going to put in. Actually, I'm going to have to undo some of the stuff I've done. If you follow my coding as we've done it, you're not going to see the bug. If you haven't followed the coding, you'll see a slight difference. If you haven't followed the coding, you'll hit the bug. If you have followed the coding, I am going to undo some of the stuff I've done in my code so far, or in my script so far. You most likely won't notice it until I point out that I've changed it. So don't worry too much. I am just undoing a fix I've already included, so you guys can see what happens if you don't. But to give you a hint, by the way, right-click on that where it was the vector and split it. If you don't remember, there's a reason I'm clicking sweep. Read that little pop-up text carefully. So here, where you come off delta y, instead of plugging into y, you can plug into x, and instead of x into x, you can plug into y. Now, that is one option. I don't like that option. I personally don't like it. It's not a bad option, actually. The reason I don't like it is, one, it's confusing to look at. Especially if you're not looking at it with regards to what's going on inside that macro, where you can see you're using screen size or viewport size. So, yeah, I like it being in the outside. I like everything being correct. When I said it was not a smart idea to reverse these, it isn't a smart idea because it just doesn't. You're more likely to make mistakes if you do that one, honestly, than if you are to do this one. I'm not saying mistakes, I mean mistakes where your code just won't work. If you get these reversed and forget and make some mistakes afterwards, you'll just get some weird stuff happening where you'll move in the wrong direction. Which, as I said, when I do this, I am going to not reverse it in this part, like I'm about to recommend you do, just so you can see what happens if you don't. So, just like if we are actually hitting WASD or the arrow keys, if someone holds down Shift, I want that to modify their movement, so I'm going to drag that out. And I'm going to drag off of here, and I'm going to do, just like with movement, float times float. I'm going to Control W that up here. And great part of the multiplicative properties is I can literally have that in any one of those slots. And the return values, again, there are two spots where you can reverse this. So, I am going to do the incorrect stuff first, so you show you what happens if you don't reverse it, just so you can get what I mean. So I'm going to plug in the Y on the bottom and the X on the top here. And I'm going to plug the one the X is plugged into the X. Please note this is not the correct step. And the same for the Y. I'm going to plug the Y into the Y. Usually that sounds correct. In this case, it isn't. Gonna stop that. I'm going to reopen it. And Well, it's already happened because my mouse is in the wrong spot. Let's go to this version where we're inside the window. All right, I'm going to move my mouse to the top of the screen, and I go to the left. I'm going to move to the bottom, and it's not doing anything. There we go. I'm going to move to the left, and it goes... All right, sorry. Mouse at the top of the screen, and we go to the right. Mouse is at the bottom, and for some reason it's not moving. All right, well, that's because I have two monitors, and I have it set up weirdly right now to be able to do the recordings. If I didn't have it set up with my recording device this way, it would show it for all directions. There we go. We have down if we're on that side. Awesome. So you can see that it's reversing our axes. So we have to reverse things in here. You can either unplug these two pins and reverse them, or unplug these two and reverse them, or even, yeah, that's about it, really. I just kind of like reversing these. It just makes, oh, that's not reversed. Get down there. That just makes more sense to me. I know some people get annoyed by the crossed wires. If you do, you can reverse these two variables instead. And we hit compile and save. Hit play. Put the mouse towards the top of the screen. We go up. And let me go full screen on this for a second. There we go. If I go full screen on the pop-out, it works. There we go. As you can see, we have edge scroll working now. The only problem is that. Now, if I, let's say, get a phone call right now and walk away from the screen before I realize this is happening, I'm on the call for 30 minutes. Like I said before, I come back and I realize I'm all the way over here. Well, I'm actually panning the, there it is. It took me a second to find it. I was panning the camera, and it took me a while to find that. Let's walk back that way. See how annoying this is. Also, this gives me time to do my usual outro for this. So, we've covered how edge scrolling works. Next week, we will do the final bit, which is dealing with this very issue that we're currently watching. And a week after that, I'm actually going to do, hopefully, 3 videos. I'll do a recap video of what we've done in this section. And then we'll get into setting up our game clock, which will record our hours, minutes, seconds, day of the week, month, and year. We'll get that first part, actually, all of that done in the first video, I hope. In the second part, we will hopefully do day and night cycle. So we'll have our sunrise and our sunset. I will warn you, however, that it isn't pretty, mostly because the default skybox, we're not going to change it. It is to show you how to set up the blueprints for the functionality. Before we set up our HUD, and just because I hate visual stuff, that's just all that video is going to be. I hate to be blunt about it. I'm not good at user interfaces. I know what goes onto it. I just don't like building them. In terms of the graphics. In terms of functionality, I will gladly do that any day of the week. The next one we will do the HUD in time before we finish out that section. So the next section will be relatively short. We'll then get into resource and resource management. I still need to decide which of the numerous ways to do resources I want to cover. And the thing is, I'm going to cover the most effective sort of introductory method so that you can build from it and learn from it and test it. If I gave you the perfect, end-all, be-all method, which I don't think there is an end-all, be-all method, it kind of negates your ability to expand it, to test it, to change it. Showing you this code the way I am, I'm hoping, or the script the way I am hoping that you're walking away and trying different things with it. And as I comment things out, I hope you're realizing, I'm done with this. I'm not going to make a reference to this section again. So you can, mess around with that as much as you want. That said, I am going to make a slight change to one of the things we commented out last week, because I've already commented on. Do know that if you do make changes in that section, just remember what I selected and what I've been hinting at for the last few videos, and you'll be fine. All right, all that said, our code is working. We can close this out, make sure it's saved. All of this is done. I'm going to comment it out. Call this our edge scroll movement. Just making sure I spelled it right. Drag it up here. Bring this in a tiny bit. I like it centered. Highlight all of that. And I am going to name this movement. I know it's saying, oh, sorry. I'm going to name it if it'll let me, movement, controls. Expand it a tiny bit so I can see all those little headers when I'm zoomed out. Drag it over here. And our camera, in terms of its base functionality, is set up. We only really have to, outside of the edge scroll issue, outside of the boundary issue, only have really one thing we need to do. And that isn't even going to be in this part of the code, or this part of the script. So, that said, I hope that you've enjoyed this lesson. I hope that you've learned a lot in this section, even though we have one video left in this section. And again, your likes are always appreciated. It lets me know that I'm bringing you content that you value and that you can use. Likewise, please leave any comments about things I should keep doing, things I should improve, things I should get rid of to make these lessons better. I cannot improve them without feedback from you guys. All of that said, before I get to my usual closing line, make sure to hit that subscribe and notify bell so you know when the next video is out. I hope to see you here in the next lesson, and as always, have a wonderful day.